Hello, everyone, and welcome to Exploring the Karmic Ground of Eclipses. My name is Michelle Dench, and I'm an astrologer and teacher. And, I felt like this is kind of a heavy topic, the eclipse season. And I wanted to just take some time today to pick apart the upcoming eclipses. Now, when we think about eclipses in general, they are um, agents of change or sort of pinnacles of evolutionary cycles and growth, right? They're windows or portals into um, a pathway that opens or closes that brings an immense karmic significance. So I called this talk, the karmic ground, because what is shifting ultimately through this last eclipse cycle is the changing of the karmic ground. And what I'm speaking about in general is that we will be moving from a nodal cycle of Taurus, Scorpio. So the lunar nodes, the nodes of the moon, these are the points in space where eclipses happen. When we are looking at the chart from an evolutionary perspective, we are looking at the birth chart, and the lunar nodes are making a very significant evolutionary pinpoint of the soul's desire in this lifetime, right? And so when we're looking at it from a transiting nodal perspective, this to me is where the significance of these particular eclipse cycles land, right? Where the eclipses are happening, what these points, these luminaries are reflecting, what is, in a way, unpredictable, unknowable, but definitely in a fated in the sense that there are some things that just happen just the same way your birth happened, the same way the sun and the moon move and happen all the time, that we don't have any control over. And as these changes come into our life, as these evolutionary pushes come through our life experience, we have, we have free will as it relates to how we respond. Often I've experienced in eclipse cycles things coming and going that I cannot do anything about, but I can do and I can be responsible for, and I can certainly catalyze the way in which I respond to these changes. And when we're talking about the growth of the soul, we have to know that on a soul level, we want to evolve, right? The bottom line desire of the soul is to evolve. And the eclipse windows, or the portals of time, and when I talk about those windows, I'm speaking very specifically about the window between the pairs. So eclipses are coming in pairs this year. We have a pair that begins April 20th and ends May 5th, with a new moon eclipse, and ends with a full moon eclipse. And then we have a second pair this year in October, on the 14th of October and the 28th. And those pairs are marking actually two completely different nodal cycles. So in a way, these are going to be two very different sets. So this is kind of part one of exploring this karmic ground, because as we get into it, you'll see we're working with the closing of a very particular cycle, a nodal cycle of Taurus and Scorpio, the last of the series of eclipses in this cycle. And then later on in the second half of this year, we will be opening a very significant eclipse cycle, and the first eclipses in this cycle. But what is unique about this particular eclipse cycle is that while the nodes are in Taurus Scorpio, the eclipse in this case of the new moon eclipse that's coming up on April 20th is in the sign of the next nodal transit, which is Aries. And then the following set of eclipses in October will be in that Aries Libra axis. So I felt like, in a way, we're dealing with a time where we sort of have one toe in the future and the rest of us in the past. And that's true for all of the transits right now. Pluto's already entered the sign of Aquarius. It's very much in this burgeoning 0 degrees energy. There's a lot of fresh wind at our back, and no planets retrograde at this time. But very slowly, and through we'll see this eclipse season, that will change. And the reality shifting to where we have maybe more of our focus on resolving the past and less of our focus on what we might want to be leaning into towards the future. The eclipses can be a place in which that those energetics, those dynamics are brought back. And when we think about the nodal cycle, let's remember that it is a 19-year cycle. So a lot of these eclipses can be repeating cycles of the past from, a little less than 20 years ago. And we also have several planets. I'm speaking specifically to Saturn in Pisces, which would have been more than 20 years ago in that sign before, and Pluto in Aquarius, which its current cycle through Aquarius is a 20-year cycle. And if we went back to where it was in Capricorn, that was the past 20 years. So we're working with a lot of long-term energy, big shifts. And if we take a time during these eclipses to really carve out space, to reflect, to digest, maybe to dissolve, maybe to rebuild, to repair, to correct, to identify and give space to resolving the karmic ground upon which all of this life experience, the soul's experience, is being guided, right? And if I were looking at your natal chart, your personal life experience, we'd be talking about what it is that this present moment is calling your soul to evolve. If we were looking at the family patterns, the ancestral patterns, the foundations of life and personal security, the deepest places in which your heart and your desires are latent, or we would say unmanifested, right? Or the places in which we struggle with resistance. In evolutionary astrology, Jeffrey Wolf Green specifically speaks to these two states of resistance or cooperation, right? And I'm suggesting on some level, like, okay, lean towards cooperation. But I actually do think that there is kind of a middle path in this, which is neither resisting, right? Neither struggling against what is, against the flow of life, suffering with that. In the Buddhist theology, they call that kind of suffering the second arrow, because it's essentially the suffering that we self-inflict through denying reality or resisting our experience, right? It's kind of like if you're in labor, pain is a natural part of the process of giving birth. The body is working really hard to open a portal through which a soul is going to emerge into the world. That process literally means that one of the most powerful muscles in the female body has to peel itself open and go from 0 to 10, right? if we were to think about an eclipse as a birth portal from a soul's perspective, some people, right, are the ones giving birth, right? Some of us are going to experience these energies much more intensively. If you're really on a soul path where this is calling you to bring something through in your life, it is going to be clear as day that you're giving birth, not something that can be ignored. And like labor, there is a process, right? It begins with maybe a feeling that something is beginning, or something is instigated, and in the same way as a birth process, that could be instigated through your choice, like, or through the soul's choice. I'm going to call it the soul's choice because the baby has the choice ultimately, I think, as to when it comes. But let's say that would be the difference between the medical model of the doctors inducing your labor, right? Life telling you, no, no, you're fired, you got to change, right? And sometimes that can happen. An eclipse can come and you can lose your job, or you can become evicted, right? Or an eclipse can happen and you can find a new home that you've been, wishing for, or you can meet the person that you've been like hoping would come into your life, right? They're all sorts of outcomes and experiences are possible, right? The soul in and of itself is going to be drawn, guided towards, and or pushed to evolve in the ways that it is. And this is going to be unique to each and every one of us in our experience. But like that birth process, as the portal is opening, right, there can be some initial early discomfort. We might even sense it now, where I feel as we're in the closing of this lunar cycle, we're in this dark time of the moon closing. The moon's applying to Pluto right now as I'm speaking, right? We're about to repeat essentially the same lunation as what we had at the new moon at the end of last month. We had a new moon in Aries at 0 degrees, and this eclipse is a new moon in Aries at 29 degrees. So it's a very, very interesting and unique signature that this lunar cycle has held for all of us. Something was beginning then that was deeply karmic and tied also to the ingress of Pluto into Aquarius. Some karmic ground was already beginning to emerge itself through our life experience, through the discomfort, maybe through the resistance, through the desire, the growing sense of the future wanting to emerge, right? For each and every life on this planet, that each and every soul that is born into carnation, into human existence, there is an impulse which brought that spirit, that soul into manifestation. Mother, father came together, had an impulse, regardless of the environment, the conditions, the effects, right? And a part of what I'm beginning to realize about these particular eclipse cycles has to do with a quote that I recently received, a message that I received from Spirit recently. It said, and I had to write this down as soon as I heard this message, I was like, okay, this is something to meditate upon. The effects of our lives are the evidence that the conditions are not right. The conditions must be changed before the effects or the evidence can change. Now, if we're thinking about that from the karmic ground of reality, right, we can look at any area in our life where there is suffering, struggle, disease, ill health, where our well-being or our family patterns, emotional patterns, where the work, where the environment, where the conditions are not right, right? And whenever we look at the deeper desires that we have as souls, the deeper desires, which ultimately draw us towards evolution, to come to really, when I'm speaking about this evolution, it's really to come to know oneself. And to know oneself deeply is to know the truth of oneself, the true identity of all of us, of all souls, the truth of our true nature as love, as beings, as souls, and all the different layers that have to be peeled away in order for us to really know the truth of ourselves, right? All the conditioning, all of the patterns, all of the effects, right? That quote that I received, I felt like it's identifying, like, oh, we can look at the effects of our lives. We can look at being overworked or overstressed. We can look at relationships where we struggle, where there are difficulties. We can look at conditions in the world, whether we're talking about political conditions, environmental conditions, physical conditions, emotional conditions, any of the conditions in the world, which we can say, oh, that's not right. It's not right that children starve to death every day. It's not right that, that species are becoming extinct on the planet. It's not right that people are living in poverty or without clean water. It's not right that housing is so expensive that most people can't afford their housing, that they have to choose between work or pleasure, that children spend the majority of their time in daycare centers because families are broken apart, or that abuses, sexual abuse or family abuses or violence exist in the world. Right? We can look at the effects and say that these conditions, these are the karmic grounds, right? That these are not right. But what the quote that I received said, Spirit was saying, essentially, the conditions must be changed before the effects or the evidence can change. And to me, I think that is one of the ways in which the eclipse portals work. They work as pattern interruptions. They work as changes ultimately to the conditions. And in the case of these eclipses in 2023, we have a core signature condition changing, being that the nodes of the moon are moving sign. And being that this particular eclipse starting on April 20th is shifting, is like it's straddling basically two worlds. I think speaks to that same feeling that I have of having having dipped the toe into the future, but having the whole rest of the being in the past, or vice versa, trying to lean, into the future, but having one toe in the past. And we hear a lot in evolutionary astrology, people speaking about the skip step and the flip-flopping back and forth between the nodal axis. And the way I'm starting to really understand this is that there is a desire to resolve the karmic ground, to change the conditions. And a part of what we struggle with on a fundamental basis is trying to change the effects without changing the conditions. And that is why it can be helpful to understand the resolution node. And I'll speak to that relative to these eclipses, and why it is helpful to understand what the work is, or what the ground is for changing the conditions. And this is going to be deeply personal to each and every one of us. This is a part of the work that I feel called to do in sessions with clients, when I'm working one-on-one with charts, and in my group teaching. I have a course beginning this month, the first cycle in this course, which is dedicated to evolving the core relational, family patterns, emotional, heart, life, love patterns. It's called Love Evolution. I did an entire talk on my YouTube channel, and also an EA Zoom talk on the core cardinal axis, speaking to some of these dynamic issues. But like, this is a part of why these things can become initiations for us, initiations for a cycle. And what's interesting about the eclipse pairs is that they come 6 months apart, that they are initiating two very different cycles in this time period. And excuse me. When we know that we're consciously being initiated into something, we can treat it as a rite of passage. We can treat it as a gateway, a portal that we're walking through. We can hold more of a witness perspective rather than, maybe we can't feel in total cooperation with what's happening in our lives. Maybe there is parts of us that are strongly in resistance to what we're experiencing. I face this every day where I can recognize the parts of me that are not wanting to let go, that feel grief, that while I might deeply desire a different reality, a different experience, different conditions in my life, is still more familiar with the comfortable discomfort of doing what I'm doing or being how I've been. But ultimately, in the evolutionary journey, evolution will push us to address all of that at our level of consciousness, at our level of choice, right? Where our free will gets to meet what is happening. And if we bring forward a spirit of neutrality or witnessing, or even hold ourselves in a container of offering ourselves to the process, offering ourselves to the initiation of change, it can feel more of a middle way, less like our skin is it's like if you're fired from the job and you're just in shock and grief, you might not notice the immense opportunities, the freedom, the spaciousness, all of a sudden the joy. Or if we're caught in the fear, eclipses can trigger fear. And a big part of this is it's like a fear treatment. We have less fear. Joseph Campbell refers to it as the hero's journey. We have less fear when we know ourselves to be on a journey. Not to say that we don't face fear, and not to say that fear cannot still influence our decisions or cloud our judgment. But I offer that this particular time, we can begin to sift through the ground. So let's take a look at the chart. And I'm going to share with you first, starting with this new moon solar eclipse. And it's perfected on April 19th, 9:12 p.m. Pacific time. So if you're in a different time zone, for example, if you are on the East Coast, Eastern Standard Time, that would be at 12:12 a.m. on April 20th. So adjust for your time zone. But for me here in California, that gives Scorpio rising with the South Node in the 12th house. The South Node in Scorpio ruled, if you're more, traditional astrologer, you might say that that's ruled by Mars, but from an evolutionary perspective, that's ruled by Pluto. And here we have Pluto in Aquarius at 0 degrees. We are looking at that Pluto in Aquarius from a more modern evolutionary perspective as being ruled by Uranus. And if we are, more traditional astrologers, we would look to Saturn. So I tend, because I'm a Gemini moon and a more intuitive astrologer, to feel the amalgamation of all things and presence them all. But I want to express the deep interrelationship between these different parts, these different rulerships, and these different pieces, right? If we are going to that Uranus, we're looking to Venus ruling Taurus, ruling the North Node, and she's in Gemini, ruled by Mercury, who is at as the station degree of the retrograde cycle for Mercury. So we've already been in a process since this last new moon in this lunar cycle of Mercury very quickly moving through all of its retrograde degrees. And when we get to this particular eclipse, Mercury is within days of the stationing and within minutes of its, it's basically at its station degree. And there's so much that speaks to all that Venus, Mercury, Mars is in Cancer, ruling that Aries sun moon. And it's literally moments after this eclipse perfects that both the sun and the moon move into Taurus and square Pluto. So this is a powerful signature in and of itself, because it's like the new moon hits this culmination of the Aries degrees, right? We have a sort of instinctual, I want to say it's like a grinding in of the karmic forces, pushing out whatever emotional content, communication, feelings, things that have been deeply stored in our bodies, in our cellular memory, relative to our physical, emotional, financial security, and relative to our past, right? All of this energy on the North Node, all of this energy tipping in and squaring Pluto, all of this evolutionary push, it says, oh my God, we so badly want to be there, right? And what's the dynamic with the flip-flopping between the nodes, right? It's that we want to evolve, right? But we have to be resolving to evolve through the resolution node. And in this case, the resolution node is the South Node. It's that Scorpio node in the 12th house. It is saying, oh, there's some deep shadow content and work that still has to be done. There's some letting, and see Haumea, the goddess she's the Hawaiian goddess of fertility, childbirth, sitting right there, retrograde, moving towards the South Node. Like that is literally a birth labor process. Like our souls want to be growing, so much more, right? We might be leaning so hard into ways of intimacy, ways of relating, relationship, connection. We might deeply desire to be joining with others, right? And what is Scorpio? Scorpio wants to merge with the deepest parts of the soul. If we were looking at this from the perspective of the underworld journey, right, it is the willingness to be taken down into that work. And while we're doing that, there's such a strong draw, like almost a stubborn, insistent, revolutionary push. Like, no, 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 no. I want the new thing. I want the new life. I want the new beginning. And I'm sure we all do, right? Given the past several years, predominantly when Saturn was in Aquarius squaring the nodal axis, right? We were deep in the thick of COVID, from the point when going all the way back to the, Saturn Pluto conjunction. All the last several years has been deeply challenging. I can't imagine that there's a human being on earth who isn't like, oh, I would like to put that past behind us and move forward with life in a new way, right? But we have yet to actually see the emotional, psychological, physiological, environmental, uh, governmental, community, system based repercussions of the past several years. We have yet to see what in our lives truly has to evolve. We can only know that there's something that so deeply calls us to begin something new, and that simultaneously there's work to be done. There are conditions which must be changed before the evidence and the effects can come into view, right? And we would call Taurus, North Node, the evidence and the effects. It's the fruits of growth, right? And the South Node, I love the Jeffrey Wolf Green quote, which says that if you address the roots, the branches will take care of themselves. That to me sums up the whole purpose and of evolutionary work, of shadow work, of personal growth work, of family, ancestral healing work, of karmic, you know, the evolutionary intention of the soul really is to bring to completion and to return to the purest, most essential desire that we have in this lifetime. And for each and every one of us, it's going to look different in terms of what the effects are in our lives, and it's going to look different in terms of what the necessary steps for resolution are. But especially if these eclipses are hitting sensitive points in our chart, right? Those themes will come up. And I've seen with eclipses, there's 3 levels of cycle to which the eclipse can manifest. And obviously this is a limited, and not definitive, but this is from my experience. There's the effects of the eclipse portal itself, right? The month, the lunation cycle, the few weeks before, the few days before and after the eclipses, the cycle from, excuse me, I'm gonna sneeze. Excuse me. Bless me. The cycle from when we have the new moon eclipse to when we have the full moon eclipse, like that's one cycle. And then we have the 6 months to the next pair of eclipses. That's another cycle. And then we have the 20 years, in the 19 years until the next set of eclipses in that same, lunar node sign. So obviously there's many different layers of cycles also layered within the eclipse itself. For example, we have Mercury present here, and this retrograde cycle with Mercury will be an influential part of this eclipse cycle. We can see that because we have Mercury at its stationing degree in the solar eclipse. And when we switch to the lunar eclipse, I don't have Lilith in here. I should add her back in here. Thank you for pointing that out. When we switch to the lunar eclipse in May, we have Mercury already retrograde on the North Node. So we can see that that's a very critical part of this particular eclipse. And in both cycles, both eclipses, Venus is in Gemini. So the relationship between Venus, Mercury, the North Node, all Uranus, the Sun, And in the case of the solar eclipse, I want to go back to that because it's so interesting. If you watch what happens, like even um, hours after that eclipse, I'll be doing my new moon ceremony for my students in the Evolution student membership on my website just after this eclipse completes itself and moves into Taurus. And you see here, it's not even a few hours later that both the sun and the moon, pass through squares to Pluto. And then we have like the opening, the first light of this moon actually is happening in Taurus with the moon moving towards the North Node with Vesta, right? So that speaks to a deeply sacred and devotional nature to what is being grown, to what is calling us, right? Evolution itself is a profound calling that all souls have and share. How each and every one of us engages with our evolution, whether in resistance or cooperation, and in this way, what our experience is, what the effects of our lives, what the conditions that we are born into and working with, right? That is unique to each individual soul, and in a way we can look at this chart and know that it's also shared. Like this evolution and this evolutionary journey is shared by all souls. And let's add Lilith just for some additional perspective from the feminine. The Lilith, the asteroid goddess. Okay. So for her position, you might be speaking about maybe a different Lilith position. I don't know. But I have the asteroid body in Virgo retrograde. And we also have Ceres in Virgo retrograde. And those are both ruled by Mercury, right? So everything in a lot of ways comes back to Venus, comes back to Mercury. So there is some message, some communication, some resolution, some work relative to the ground of our lives, wherever Taurus falls in your chart, that is undergoing a evolutionary process. And in the Pluto book, Jeffrey Wolf Green speaks to the retrograde significance as an acceleration of soul growth. So we can see how what happens with this particular pair of eclipses is that we begin with the preparation of that soul growth. Wherever Mercury's been traveling now, you've already probably received many of the messages, right? The karmic ground is not out of sight in this case. I think we can already sense it, feel it, we're aware of it. Oh, in your birth chart. Thank you for clarifying. I appreciate that. Yeah, wow, that's a powerful release, right? And what does Lilith signify? The unadulterated feminine, the true feminine, the first feminine, the ancient and original feminine. And wherever that hasn't been released, wherever, someone I was speaking to today was acknowledging, Michelle, you are a wild feminine at heart. And it's like, yeah, and if I have been conditioned towards repression, whether it's self-repression, whether it's through guilt, shame, whether it's through self-suppression, whether it's through you know the feeling that it's like not socially acceptable to be a particular way, whether it's like, oh, there aren't groups of people, or, I hear a lot of people feel like, oh, I don't know, where's my tribe? Where are my people? Where are my, feeling alienated, even from the deepest parts of ourselves. We can essentially, this was a second realization I had this week that sort of came through a spirit message. When people are not allowed to be who they are, they will need you to be who you are not, right? That need to control, dominate, or avoid, repress, hide, um, be normal, don't definitely act as if everything is normal. It's like socially conditioned that being, I want to be normal, like I want to grow up and be normal, right? That's like not necessarily the life objective that I would say for myself, but like there's a lot of social conditioning around normality. And what have we conditioned? If we really truly identify what we've conditioned to be normal, it is not normal, my friends. It is not natural. It is not healthy. It is not normal to be overworked, underslept, stressed out, overstretched. It is not normal to live in a society where people on the daily struggle and suffer. Like, if that is the definition of normal, let's all not be normal, right? Or if it is normal, if it is considered normal to hide parts of oneself, to not be oneself, to show up in a different way for some people than for other people, to not be able to be loved or accepted as you are. If that's normal, like, I don't want to be normal. I'm sorry. It's not. We are learning and unlearning, that I'm speaking to the Lilith, how to free ourselves from the guilt of what has been posed as and defined as what a normal feminine person, feminine, and I don't just mean like male or female, like biologically or genetically. It's like each and every one of us, regardless of your gender expression or identity, holds masculine and feminine. Every single person has a Lilith in their chart, has a Mars in their chart, regardless of whatever biological or genealogical or self-identified conditions one might feel they are to be. So, everyone has the right to be themselves and to be true to themselves as a soul, and to pursue the path of their soul in healing and resolving the karmic ground of anywhere we've limited what the soul is, what we're all here to do, right? This is why so many people come to me and they're wanting to know what their soul's purpose is, or what their calling is, right? And it's like wanting to know where your happiness is. Like, that is a genuine desire to know and to think or imagine that our happiness or our purpose lies in a specific thing, a possession, a relationship, a job, an identity, stuff, anything outside of us is like reaching for the North Node, but never being able to get there, right? You will get the thing and it will disappoint you. You will be in the relationship and they will piss you off, or they will leave you, or they will, it's like the crisis of, you will get the job and then it'll be lost, or you will, have the body and then it will change, right? These are the 10,000 things they talk about in the Tao of the 10,000 things that ultimately we can never find our satisfaction in that. And the soul knows that at some level, right? That's why the ultimate desire of the soul is to return to source. But each of these eclipse portals I see as windows into that evolutionary nature. And I'm speaking to how deeply we might be really drawn to the thing that might, the fruit, the shiny fruit, right? And if we see it growing on somebody else's tree, or we see somebody else has that ripe and delicious thing, or they are doing, right, we can in many ways be inspired or desire or be reaching for it. And as I was speaking to earlier, that flip-flopping between the nodes, it's like we won't be able to sustain any level of happiness, possession, joy, safety, security, stability in that thing, because it's guaranteed to change. It's guaranteed, just like the tree in and of itself will go through the season of having no fruit on its branches, and then a little bit of leaves, and then eventually filled with apples, and then apples falling to the ground, and then apples rotting, and then composting, right? This is the Taurus Scorpio axis. And that composted apple actually nourishes the tree, and then the tree sheds its leaves in that season, and then there is a regeneration, right? In a way, we are the survivors of our ancestors' traumas, limitations, difficulties, and resilience, and their strength, and their capacities, and their choices, right? All of their choices lined us up to be here where we are right now, with the conditions and the effects that we are working with. So I'm going to switch now to the other side of this eclipse, which will be the full moon in Scorpio. And that's on May 5th. And in this chart, we have now Mercury fully retrograde, moving actually towards its station degree. It stations at 5 Taurus. And just like if you were, I'm letting people know, like, your note to self for this year, the Mercury retrograde and the Jupiter retrograde share the exact same degrees. That is also another unique signature of this particular year. Jupiter is not yet in the sign of Taurus, but is finishing up its time in Aries right now. And it will go all the way to 15 Taurus, the same as Mercury, and station retrograde all the way back to 5 Taurus, same as Mercury. So there is an interwoven signature in this particular season of Mercury Venus issues, Jupiter Venus issues. And you could see, Jupiter's working on the Aries axis right now. It's working on the Mars, and it's ruled by that Mars in Cancer. So, the deepest parts of us, the most vulnerable parts of us, can really stand up for themselves, right? It's sort of like, if we haven't learned emotional, if we were raised Cancer, let's say Mars in Cancer, Mercury in Scorpio, if we were raised by a mother who was controlling, angry, manipulative, and we didn't learn in that way to develop emotional sensitivity, that part of us where strong emotions comes up might naturally, almost internally, respond to the feminine, to the mother, to what would normally be the most tender and vulnerable caretaker of those emotions, with like jadedness, fear, hiding, let me keep that. And then what's the courage in that particular archetype? What's the healing, right? The healing is through the intimacy, to be seen, to share vulnerably, to create new containers, to communicate and bring up old stuff, and actually to realize that it doesn't belong to the mother or to the feminine, but it belongs to the emotional body, right? It just needs to be released, verbalized, spoken, seen, with some curiosity, open-mindedness, but within a safety that what's being said or what's being shared or what's being acknowledged from the past doesn't belong to us, doesn't define us, isn't because we're bad or wrong or have done anything, but because, this is a part of the release of the conditioning and the release. It's a part of the ultimate healing that we all share. And so with this, with this particular signature, and you can see Pluto's retrograde already at this time. The retrograde station is May 1st for Pluto, and we'll go all the way back into Capricorn. And the next series of eclipses will be happening when Pluto is in Capricorn. So that is another reason why these two pairs of eclipses are very different and unique in their signatures. And so that Jupiter function, Jupiter expanding everything, right? This can be a big emotional release. This can be a really powerful time. So what do we need to do to take care of ourselves? If we are really treating this as a rite of passage, we might create more space for safety, containment, or feel like allowing more to be felt in the world. This is kind of like turning down the volume on the intense heavy metal rock and roll music, and like essentially starting to slow. The beauty of Taurus is, right, slowing down, nervous system regulation, being able to ground our emotions, creating places or ways or outlets, for verbalizing, for sharing, for communicating, for just being able to express what we feel, how we feel. If we feel things, we heal things, and they move through us, and they don't consume us, they don't become us, they don't define us, they free us, and we become free. We become free through that vulnerability. It may mean facing the discomfort of things that we don't want to say, things that we don't want to hear, things that we don't want to see, things that we don't want to acknowledge. And ultimately, it's like that statement where at first the truth hurts, but then it sets you free. In this case, it's like it also heals us. And what's interesting here is that Hygeia, the goddess of the asteroid goddess of health and healing, she's in Aquarius. She's been in Aquarius for a while now. She is now perfecting an exact square in this lunation to Uranus. So this real breakthrough, things can break through, and actually we can actually become free of a lot of psychic content and a lot of the past. And that's the beauty of the South Node being the resolution node in this particular signature, because nobody wants the past to keep following them around. Nobody wants the past to be repeating, but we really can't begin anything new without fully releasing and recognizing the role that the past plays in who and what and the direction of our lives, right? That's why, I mean, you're not consciously walking around going like, oh yeah, that 3-year-old self, when I was 4, that one thing happened and that makes me do this. And when I was 1, that one thing happened. When I was an infant, I don't even remember it, but I have this sort of like precognitive experience of when my mother's labor was stalled and I was, had to be, I came out in a C-section, but it's like, I didn't want to be here. I feel like I'm from another planet. I feel like I don't belong. And my mother was like struggling so much, because she didn't want that kind of birth, or she didn't, it's like, and I'm left with this feeling my whole life of that not being wanted, right? But it has nothing to do with you, nothing to do with your soul, right? These are maybe all sorts of psychic memories or all sorts of feelings, experiences, parts of you that haven't really caught up to who you are in the present moment, haven't really caught up to the life that you're desiring, the soul growth that you're at, the place where you actually are, who you actually are. And a part of what happens is we don't actually know or realize or are aware of the stories that we tell ourselves, or the parts of ourselves that are operating all the time from these elder or younger perspectives, and how they are filtering the lens through which we're seeing our life experience. And this is where I can see how retrograde cycles correspond to acceleration of soul growth. I'm going to sneeze again. Maybe not. And how that process, when the past comes back around, becomes an invitation if we accept the catalysm, right? With Mercury retrograde, we always blame like, oh, that thing is breaking down, or that's not working because Mercury is retrograde. But I love Adam Summer. I heard him say once, it's a MRI, it's a Mercury retrograde intervention. And I love that. And it's become a part of the way I look at when things break down in our lives, regardless of whether it's like a past relationship or a past thing or a past situation that comes back up and triggers us again, or whether it's our washing machine breaks down and we have to get it fixed, or whether our car, whether it like whatever, wherever the condition or the effect, wherever the effect starts to show us that it's really not working, what does it do? It intervenes for us to make a correction. It intervenes for us to make a new choice, make a change, resolve something. If we signed a contract and it wasn't right, if we made an agreement and something needs to be changed, if we're in a relationship or we have an old relationship that comes back, and then maybe even just the conversation or the meeting or the seeing of that person or whatever it is, all of a sudden it's like, oh, forgiveness, or we come to realize something about ourselves, or there's some healing, or that once ancient feeling that our mother gave us, right? I'm going back to that early example that I gave with the mother situation, that allows for us to realize or recognize something that we didn't see before. And as soon as we do that, with our choice, with our free will, with our our soul's intention to grow, we can engage with that in a new way. And this is where we can do the South Node, the old thing, in a new way. We can bring the full power of our vulnerability, our feelings, our life force, the depth of where we want connection, relationship, growth, stability, all the parts of us, our unique needs for community and friendship and freedom and sovereignty and individuality, all of our younger parts and all of our present moment parts can come together and be integrated. And these integration portals are ultimately on the other side, there's someone new emerging. And it's really true of you in every moment, right? In breath, out breath, beginning, ending, all these things are happening simultaneously. And who you are now, at the point where you're watching this video, whether you're watching this live or watching the recording, is not the same person as who you were when you began this day. You've already had so many different experiences that have affected, right? And the effects of our environment, they ultimately begin to change when we get into the place of choosing to affect the conditions. And where these eclipses, in particular here in Taurus, Scorpio, Leo, Aquarius land, in influentially moving us towards this next set, which will be in the Aries, Libra, Cancer, Capricorn land, right? These are foundational to our identity, our sense of self, self-worth, self-value, agency, autonomy, our sense of connection and community, our sense of creative freedom, our joy, what we come with in this lifetime in terms of our wounds and the fears and the betrayals and the abandonments and the distrust that we carry with us, that we're all resolving and healing in some way, shape, or form to come into greater union with the truth of who we are so that we can ultimately evolve in the ways that our soul is calling for in this lifetime. So with that, I think I'll pause and see if there are any questions. Otherwise, if there are no questions, you should be able to find the replay of my Cardinal Cross of Life talk, which I did on EA Zoom a few weeks ago. That I spoke to the Pluto squaring the nodal axis. So if there were bits that I brought in around the Pluto square, which I didn't talk about a lot here, but I'm sort of assuming this knowingness that Pluto is in this movement towards squaring the nodal axis. And that is a big part of these eclipses. And I also did a talk on my YouTube channel, which is Astrology with Michelle, on the introduction to love evolution, which is my online course, which will be the next 6 months. It's a monthly class series, each month dedicated to the transit of Venus in relationship to Pluto and to core evolutionary themes regarding our relationship to the healing the heart of the feminine is what it's awakening and healing the heart of the feminine. So you can watch the introduction to love evolution. That is a free class that's available on my website, astrologywithmichelle.com. And there will be links to all of that in the description of this video. Yeah, and if there are no questions about these eclipses, I'll just tune in and see if there's anything closing. so I just got the image of the washing machine again, and the message that eclipses are like a wash cycle. So right now we're sort of like throwing all the dirty laundry into the machine. Some of the things might all be there, right? They might be some things that you really enjoy in the washing machine, and there might be some things that are old and worn out, and there might be some things that are more dirty than others. And we're sort of in this phase of like all that stuff's going in the washing machine. And the eclipse is the point where it's like the accelerated spin cycle. Everything's been soaked, it's wet, it's like, and it's really trying to get out all of that dirt so that when the spinning ends, you can kind of take what's in the machine out and put it in the dryer. And there may, the dryer might be the 6 months in between the two eclipse cycles. It might be, and you can take a look like, oh, did this thing get clean? Do I need to wash it again? Do I need to let it go? Does it still fit me? These are all really good questions to be asking ourselves. Do I value this? Do I love this? Am I ready to let this go? Does this reflect who I truly am? Does this reflect what I desire in my life? Am I safe to share my emotions? Do I feel a sense of willingness or openness to the vulnerability that would be required of me to change? There's, a Brene Brown, she does a talk on vulnerability that I love. I think I have it somewhere on my website, but she speaks to this bravery. The soul work of evolution, the conscious choice to initiate oneself as a rite of passage, to hold all of the experience in our life, neither from maybe we're not fully cooperating and we don't want to resist anymore either, because that kind of feels shitty. Sorry for the apologies for the language. It feels no good to resist our evolution. Like, it's suffering sucks in a lot of ways. And sometimes we get to the point where we're sick and tired of being sick and tired, and that's where our resistance dissolves and becomes cooperation, or we might otherwise call that surrender. But I do think that there's also somewhere in it a middle place of actively choosing to hold it all, to merge with the reality of our desire to evolve, and without rejecting our resistance or becoming a wet noodle of like surrender to the universe. So anyway, I hope that you've enjoyed this. I hope that this eclipse time is a blessed um you know spin cycle and brings you greater alignment with who you truly are. I will come back on EA Zoom later this year with a part 2 of the wonderful ground of exploring the evolution of eclipses. And thank you so much for tuning in. Bye for now, my friends. As always, you can catch me at astrologywithmichelle.com.
Thank you so much, Michelle. That was just the metaphors were awesome, as one of the comments said, and the advice was great. I have one little observation that Haumea is conjunct where the new Venus star point was.
Yeah.
And I mean, it all goes together, and here we go, birthing the new.
Isn't that interesting? Thank you for pointing that out, because she does, and the second set of eclipses will be with the Libra South Node as the resolution node, right?
Right.
Not
Yes.
Pluto ruling the South Node, but Venus ruling the South Node, which I spoke about a lot about in the on the previous talk. And Jupiter in the coming days after this eclipse will, oppose that Haumea. So there is something significant to this birth metaphor, a birth of a new identity in many ways, I'm sure, for many of us. And yeah, and may it be a healing one. May it be a beautiful rebirth.
Yes.
Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much. We look forward to the next one.